Hello everyone, I'm Heath, and in this video I would like to talk about what hit points are and the general hit point debate. And of course, this is something that has gone on for many years before even the internet existed about what hit points are and whether or not they are useful or good for our RPGs. And I actually don't want to go into too much exaggerated detail here, but when I was writing up some notes about my thoughts on 5th edition and whether it was suitable for use for different worlds, the systems for different worlds that we were creating, of course hit points did come up. And I have some notes on inflationary hit point systems and then also different ways to handle damage and things like that that relate to hit points. So before I talk about those, I suppose I should just briefly talk about hit points in general and what I think about them and what the problem is. Because in general, I'm not against hit points. You know, we need some kind of way to indicate damage against a player and how much damage they're taking before they're dead or otherwise out. And there are different ways to do this as well, and I'm all for experimenting with those, and I think they should be talked about. But in general, also, it does seem like an intuitive way to do it, to say, okay, you've got a certain number of points, weapon strikes take away those points. When you lose all those points, you're dead, and that's basically the hit point system. And so it's just, you know, a numerical accounting of, you know, how close you are to being dead. And then people have different variations where you're like, oh, if once you lose half, you're something like wounded or bloodied, and something else happens to you. So my problem has never been hit points per se. If you're going to be doing something like this, it seems like a reasonable way to go about it. There may be other ways. They may be better or worse. Everything's probably a compromise, but generally speaking, some type of tracking a hit point isn't so terrible. But where I think it really starts to go off the rails is when you start talking about inflationary hit point systems. And that's systems to me where an inflationary hit point system is where when you're going up in, you know, level, like in Dungeons and Dragons, you are starting to add hit points to your character. And of course, this is supposed to capture the intuitive notion that the better the warrior you are, the more grit you've got, and the more you're going to be able to hang in a fight. I won't even say at this point the more damage you can take, but I'm just going to say the more you can hang in a fight, and that's supposed to be represented by increasing hit points. And this is definitely something that's easy. If you just have this pool of points and you are taking them down as you get hit by arrows and axes and swords and everything else, it seems reasonable that if you want to have somebody who is a better warrior who can hang in fights longer, just add more hit points to them. But I think that's when we really start to having a problem, because we start getting into all of these situations where barbarians can just jump off a cliff and there's no way that that jump can kill them because they just have so many hit points, and whether or not that's a fall that anyone could actually reasonably tolerate, you know. And then also, like, how many strikes by an axe or a sword or something is it going to take in order to kill you? And then of course you get people coming back with, well, now wait a minute, just because you lose hit points doesn't mean you were actually hit by the weapon, and so forth and so on. And so that's what starts to generate all of this controversy about hit points. And I do think that it's important to understand, for many systems, what it is that those hit points actually represent. Because some people will be like, well, it includes your luck. You know, maybe you would have taken that hit by the axe, but either you're so good you were able to deflect the blow after all, or you were just lucky and it did just miss by a little bit, and so it didn't actually hit you. And then people come up with systems where, like, so obviously you don't actually get hit until you start losing your original number of hit points or things like that. And there are all kinds of house rules all over the internet for that, trying to come up with this discrepancy. But it all is the result of this inflationary hit point system. To me, it has always been compounded by the fact that the ways, for instance, in Dungeons and Dragons that you get hit points back do seem to have things to do directly with healing. For instance, a potion of healing should heal you, right? That's one way that you get hit points back. And so if you haven't actually been hit by those axes and swords that have taken away your hit points, and you're not actually cut up and bruised and whatever, and it's just, you know, your luck, this abstract idea of luck, or that you're just being ground down and you're actually being exhausted, and so you may not be able to be fast enough to dodge the next thing, does taking a potion of healing actually help? Now, in 5th edition, it just says get back hit points, right? So it's called a potion of healing, but it just gives you hit points back. And that's how it skips over all of this, right? That yes, it's a potion of healing. What does it do? Well, we just have this line that says get back, you know, 2d4 plus 4 plus 2 hit points, or whatever it is. That's just what it does mechanically. Don't think about it too much farther beyond that. And okay, and in many cases, people don't need to think about it beyond. But also think about the example of cure wounds. Okay, that's what the spell is. If I'm a cleric, what am I casting? Cure wounds. That seems to imply to me that the person is wounded, and that I can see that, and therefore I know that I need to go over and cast Cure Light Wounds on them. Things start to get a little bit murky if you're telling me that because of the loss of hit points, that person actually isn't wounded. And I think that starts to matter. For instance, if you are a cleric on the battlefield, how are you supposed to determine who is it that needs your healing magic? Well, an easy way to determine that is if they've got a gigantic cut or gash and it's spewing blood, and you can really tell, oh, that person is injured, it's obvious, I need to go and cast, healing magic on them. It becomes a lot less it becomes a lot more difficult for clerics to determine who exactly needs healing if nobody out there is actually injured, and these hit points are something that's rather abstract or, completely abstract in many cases. How is the cleric supposed to know that? And so different people at different gaming tables will have different opinions on, what is too much metagaming or something like that. Because a cleric could certainly ask the other players, like, how many hit points are you down to? Are you hurt? Oh, you need some healing? Then I go over there, and we just know they're down hit points. So the cleric needs to go over there and fix the hit points, and we don't worry about what the actual situation on the battlefield is. But on the other hand, other tables, if you're talking about the chaos of battle, will want to know, well, how do you know that this person is running out of some type of abstract luck that is represented by their hit points, and that you need to go cast a Cure Wounds spell on them, and that's going to heal that? I mean, you don't know. So obviously different tables have different ways of handling this, but it has always struck me as odd. This situation has never been, in my opinion, the ideal one. I would want to be able to fix this in some way if I could. This problem also came up to me when there was a distinction between things like Cure Light Wounds and Cure Moderate Wounds and Cure Heavy Wounds and things like that in previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and they heal increasingly large numbers of hit dice or dice worth of hit points, rolling more dice to potentially cure the character of more hit points worth of damage. But then you look at something like a, NPC warrior or something like that in the army, some peasant who has picked up a pitchfork in order to defend against the goblin raid, and the goblin hits them with their axe or something like that, and they only had 4 or 5 or 6 hit points anyway, and now they are down to 1 or 2. From a storytelling perspective, I would certainly think that peasant just suffered a very grievous wound. And so if you are a cleric and you have Cure Light Wounds, does it make sense that you're actually able to heal that person, that commoner who had 6 hit points and now has 1 because of an apparently very devastating strike by a goblin axe? Well, I tend to think no, that you're like, oh, that would be a very serious and grievous wound, and the first level cleric with Cure Light Wounds might not be able to do anything about that. But of course, game mechanically, the cleric can, because the Cure Light Wounds might heal 1d4, 1d6 hit points or whatever it was, and potentially be able to get that character all the way back to full health. And then likewise, you get the problem on the reverse end if you've got this great powerful warrior who has 80 hit points, and now they have 60 and are missing 20. Arguably, you might say that, well, the warrior is not seriously wounded. Maybe that is a light wound to the warrior, even though it's 20 points as far as, its raw number. It's a much smaller percentage of the hit points that warrior has taken than that commoner did when they went from 6 to 1. So maybe it is a light wound. But Cure Light Wounds really isn't going to be able to help that person, because if it's, 1d4 or 1d6 or whatever it was, a small number of hit points to be replenished, then the warrior still needs a whole lot more healing. That warrior needs something like Cure Massive Wound or something, a much more powerful spell in order to cure all 20 of those hit points, even though it might not actually be a severe or great wound or whatever it is. So those are the things that have always bothered me when I've been thinking about hit points, and I think it definitely has to do with the inflationary hit point system. So I'm not against hit points. I am against inflationary hit points, because I think that's the root of all of our problems. Now, of course, it's not a problem to everybody. Obviously, on the internet, all kinds of YouTube videos and blog posts and things like that, people have come up with reasons that are perfectly acceptable to them to explain the situation within their game, and that's great. But my point is, The reason we're having to do all of this anyway, I think, is because of inflationary hit points. And so that's one of the things that I would look at to adjust if I were creating a role-playing game, and is something that I brought up to the developers when we were doing the Journey to the Tree of Sorrows role-playing game, even though we went with 5th edition kind of as it stood for that game. But we'll talk more about the non-inflationary hit point systems in another video, because I think this one's gone on long enough. But that's basically my overview of the hit point situation. So what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps a lot. But also, please check out The Cultists, the web series on this channel about modern-day D&D playing Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who just don't understand. Season 1 is on the channel now. But also, please check out my YouTube channel. I have over 150 videos on tabletop games and the fantasy genre. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy many of them as well. I look forward to seeing you for them and many more videos to come. Later.